Hey everyone, welcome to Yoga Break It Down. In this episode, we're going to have some alternatives for downward dog, plank, and side plank that won't aggravate your wrists. This episode is dedicated to my friend Eileen. Hey Eileen, that she has a line of work where she's using her hands and her wrists are aggravated a lot, and that a teacher in a yoga class actually told her that there weren't any alternatives for side plank. So shame on you, teacher. So dolphin pose is basically downward dog where you're on your forearms. So you might have your forearms parallel with the palms down, or you might choose to interlace your hands. In either instance, you're going to want to have your elbows shoulder distance apart or even a smidge closer, because sometimes as we go into this, the elbows want to scooch out a little bit. So this pose is recommended to do on a yoga mat because of the traction that the mat provides. So placing your arms in position, then you're going to make sure that your feet and knees are hip distance apart. You're going to tuck your toes under, curl the toes under, start to lift the knees up off the floor. And as always, the knees are in charge. So as we move towards straightening the leg, if you realize that you need to keep a bend in the knee, that's fine. In downward dog and in this dolphin pose, there's a tendency for our weight to shift forward. So a big part of this pose is the hips are extending back and up as the heels drop down to or towards the floor. You might be like me, where not in this lifetime will my heels touch the floor, and that's fine. It's still the same stretch, whether your heels are touching the floor or they're extending down towards the floor. We just keep that extension happening. So we're extending the forearms down into the mat, and simultaneously we're lengthening up from the elbows up through the upper arms, lifting the torso up to take weight off the shoulder. And again, getting those hips up and back are going to take weight off of the shoulder. Your forearms are really pushing down into the mat. And I tend to think of like a wrestler or the Hulk going, "Urgh!" It's a push down and a lift up away from that. But without the tension in the neck and the shoulders that starts to add to. Now that you've got into your dolphin pose, bring your torso forward until your shoulders are directly over the elbows. Usually, just like I demonstrated, this will bring you to a position where your butt's still up in the air. It's sort of a weird angle pose, but I want to make sure that your shoulders are over the elbows. Then you can scooch your toes further back until your hips are able to lower to the midpoint from the shoulders to the heels to create a plank position. In all of our yoga poses, we're extending in two different directions. You're going to be extending forward through your shoulders, back through your heels, which is going to help to keep the hips in that midline. We want to avoid the hips sinking down. That's going to be hard on your back and shoulders, and it's not working the abs. I didn't tell you that plank pose is working those abs. And we don't want to lift the hips too high. That's really just avoiding the pose, avoiding the work of the abs strengthening. So from here, you could do a flow where for one breath or for a few breaths, you go up into dolphin and then you shift forward into your plank, back and forth in a series of repetitions, the length your choice. I often like to go with the breath where I inhale as I go one direction, let's say to plank, and exhale as I come up, or opposite. I inhale as I come up into the dolphin, and then I exhale as I go forward into plank, and for maybe about 10 repetitions. Like I said, to make it an abdominal workout, we really have to make sure that each time we come into plank, the hips are in that midline. That's where the abdominals will be working. Now we're going to go into dolphin as a side plank. So for this, I'm positioning my forearm on the mat so that you see the forearm sort of extending out from the line of my shoulder and my torso towards the middle of the room. you want to have the palm down and nice and even on the mat. In this first example or alternative, I'm taking the foot of what will be the upper leg and I'm bringing it forward, placing the palm of the foot on the floor. The lower leg, which is the fully extended leg, you really need to make sure that the foot stays flexed and ankle straight. People struggle with this, and this may make it a deal breaker for you if your ankles are not comfortable with it. So again, like in all of the work that we do, it's fine to say that this pose is not for me, you're going to pass on it, but you're developing other poses in your repertoire to draw from at any time to use as alternatives. So we're flexing in the foot of the lower leg, keeping the ankle nice and straight. Having that the foot of the upper leg in front of us, we push that a little bit into the mat, and that's going to help us lift our hips. Because again, just like regular plank, we don't want the hips to collapse here. That's just going to create weight that pulls on the shoulder and is really uncomfortable and sort of dangerous for the shoulder. So keep those hips up. So the full side plank would involve both legs straight, the top leg resting over the lower leg, but both feet flexed, ankles straight and strong, as I'm demonstrating here. If we're comfortable, we can raise the upper arm up, and we want this to extend directly over the shoulder as I'm demonstrating. So really there's going to be a straight line from the elbow on the floor up through that upper arm, up through the torso, through the higher arm, up out the fingertips. Often in classes, and I'm not sure why, I often see people reaching back behind them and turning the chest up towards the ceiling. I think it helps with balance when we keep things in nice straight lines. It's easier for our mind's eye to sort of figure out where everything goes. So now I'm going to demonstrate for you a standard downward dog, a standard plank, a standard side plank. So for any of you whose wrists would not be aggravated by this, you are welcome to try these poses out. Downward dog is one of the main poses that's going to come up in a yoga class or a yoga video. And we're using a lot of the same awareness and a lot of the same adjustments that we did in our dolphin pose as well. So here we want to have the palms shoulder distance apart, and you feel the pads of the hands sinking evenly into the mat and each of the fingers, and you're extending up through the wrists, the forearms, the upper arms, into the back, and you want to feel the hips extending up and back. If you feel your weight continuously sinking forward, I recommend bending the knees, lifting the heels a little bit, and that's going to make it a little easier to draw those hips up and back. And then once you're there, envision hooking your hips on an imaginary hook hanging from the ceiling. And envision your hips staying right in that place. So you have the nice elongated torso and arms, the hips sort of locked into that position, and you're going to slowly drop the heels down from those hips, which are not going to lower with it, right? And the heels again drop to or towards the floor, but maybe not in this lifetime. Downward dog is an intense pose. It's a staple of yoga, but you will always be working on your downward dog. It's not going to feel easy. So going into the plank from downward dog, same as the dolphin, we shift our shoulders forward, in this case until they're over the elbows and over the wrists, and then we adjust the distance of the toes so that we can lower the hips to that midpoint. And again, you are welcome to do a flow with this too. Side plank from the downward dog, you can bring that one foot forward if you want, or you can keep the feet together. So it's the same thing. From when we're in dolphin, we really need to come out of dolphin and sort of reassemble to do our dolphin side plank. A side plank from downward dog can be more fluid as you get better at it. And again, as long as your ankles are okay with this. So for me, coming into side plank from downward dog, I'm in my downward dog, and then while in downward dog, I bring my feet together so I have sort of a unileg. And then I rotate that whole unileg until the outside of that lower foot is on the floor, and then I make my adjustments in my side plank. It's a precarious position because you have nothing extending out into the room like that forearm in the dolphin plank or the foot forward. So that's another thing. That's a big thing that forearm or that leg forward is helping you with. It makes you more three-dimensional and not so precarious, so it helps a bit with balance. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Yoga Break It Down. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, add this video to your watch later list, and remember that school teachers need yoga, tax collectors need yoga, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson needs yoga, and you, baby, you need yoga. See you later.